My name is Lia Swiniarski, and I'm a rising senior Feb at Middlebury College studying history and political science. I'm so glad to welcome you to an episode in our new virtual career exploration series called MIDDVantage, Careers in International Development. In this series, you will get to hear from many talented members of the Middlebury community who work on different issues and in different institutions in the field of international development. And these folks will help us learn more about how to enter this challenging and rewarding field. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Ellen Tompsett. Ellen is the Global Collaboration Manager for Population and Reproductive Health for the USAID Global Health Supply Chain Procurement and Supply Management Project at Chemonics International. She is responsible for enhancing collaboration in the global contraceptive market by forging and maintaining strong relationships with major procurers of reproductive health products. She previously worked as a Senior Program Officer for reducing stockouts at the Reproductive Health Suppliers Coalition, where she oversaw the health system strengthening portfolio of activities, including the Stockout Initiative. A supply chain management expert, Ellen has over a decade of experience working in logistics coordination in reproductive health, disaster response, and humanitarian relief for various UN nonprofit and for-profit entities, which included travel to Egypt, India, and Sudan. Ellen holds an MBA from Massachusetts Institute of Technology Sloan School of Management and a BA in political science from Middlebury College. Thank you for joining me today, Ellen.
Well, thank you.
So my first question is, your current job focuses on the reproductive health supply chain. Could you explain what your work entails on a day-to-day and long-term basis and why you took a focus on this specific area of international development?
Sure. So I work at a company called Chemonics. It's quite a large contractor with the U.S. government, USAID. And 4 years ago, they won what is the largest contract in USAID history. It's a $9.5 billion contract where we procure all the health commodities that the U.S. government donates to developing countries. So that includes, your HIV, antiretrovirals, rapid test kits, malaria, bed nets, other essential medications, lab reagents, in my specific area, which is family planning and contraceptives. And so in my role as a global collaboration manager, in our space, for the public sector, there are two large procurers of family planning products that are donated to developing countries, to the public sector. And so that's the UN agency that's responsible for family planning assistance, UNFPA, and USAID. And between the two of us, we control over half of the market. So the UNFPA alone is 40% of the market. So you can imagine that when we work together, we can have a significant impact on suppliers, on what's available in the market, even on prices and so on. And so my work is to really get these two donors of products to work together and play nicely in a sandbox. And so that can include, so my day-to-day, I have a number of different pieces of, supply chain projects and improvement projects that I work on. So for example, we do a lot of work. I manage a team that collects all the data around stock levels in central medical stores across over 30 countries to see if any of them are at risk of stock out or overstock. And because these countries, their public sectors are reliant on these two donors, we can collect this data, and if issues do come up, say they're likely to stock out, they're likely to be overstocked, or even if they just want to know when their next shipment is, we work closely with UNFPA and several other organizations to make sure that they have the information that they need. If we need to, to speed up a shipment, expedite a shipment, or to postpone it, cancel it, that sort of thing. We're just kind of my team are the firefighters who ensure that that these issues are addressed. And so that's one example of a number of different projects that I work on. And then on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of the short term. We also do a lot of work around supply planning, so ensuring that together countries will have what they need over 18 months or the next 2 years. And so working with them on supply planning, and then with what UNFPA puts forward versus what we put forward in terms of funding for contraceptives, what we agree to procure versus what they agree to procure, so we're not buying the same product while another product goes unpurchased. So there's a lot that we can do to ensure that countries have what they need, so ultimately contraceptives get into the hands of women.
Yeah, thank you. And next question, historically, international development has focused on countries in the global north coming into the global south and implementing their own resources as they sort of saw fit, which has been seen as a power dynamic, which was critiqued as a version of post-colonialism and expression of white savior complex. Looking at the industry from a 2020 perspective, do you believe these power dynamics have shifted at all? And if yes, how so?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the international development field is always developing and changing. I think what we've seen, especially in the last 10, 20 years, is that the traditional international development sector is which is what I work in, is fading. Governments such as the US or the UK, the amount of money that they're putting towards development, it's declining, and maybe I'm a pessimist, but I don't think it's coming back. And we've seen countries in Africa have been developing. They now have the model where the white person from the West goes and you take your family and you live in the capital city, and and you make this whole expat life. Those opportunities, I believe, are going away because there are Africans, or there are people in these developing countries that have the skills and knowledge and can do these jobs. And so we're seeing a lot more, implementation being done locally through local NGOs. We're seeing it done with using local staff, or what we call third country nationals. So say instead of someone from the global north, it's someone from a different a different country, another developing country. So we might have a Rwandan staff that is now working in Cameroon or something. So we're seeing a lot more of that in the traditional sphere, and then overall there are a lot more companies, there's a lot more commerce that is available, that's building the economies of these countries, particularly in the ones that have better governance or more stability, potentially more resources, where like I said, the traditional development approaches are no longer valid, in that we're now switching to more investments, impact investing. You hear about social enterprise development. Those sorts of opportunities, I think, are the direction that the field is going.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, could you talk a little bit about your journey from Middlebury to your current position, how your interest in the field was shaped, and the steps that you took to build your career to get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a long story, I guess, but I've taken a bit of a winding path to get where I am. I graduated from Middlebury in 2002, had a degree in political science. I went and I worked at an orphanage in India for a year, and there it was actually a trip to Sri Lanka and up to to northern Sri Lanka, which at the time was under a ceasefire from the recently signed from the Civil War. And that really got me more interested in humanitarian relief. And so when I came back from there, I thought, okay, I've done my 1 year in the field, I'll go get a job in DC. But the only job I could get was a receptionist. And so, and the two people before me had been master's degree students or master's degree, and they'd also been receptionists. So that gives you an idea of how difficult it is to get a job in sort of the nonprofit international development sector. And I don't think it's gotten easier since, since then. And so I started volunteering with the Red Cross and got interested in, they had a lot of free training in disaster response, and ended up doing a lot of volunteer work in supply chain and logistics for them, which is how I developed, an interest in that field. And spent 2 years with a contractor for Department of Homeland Security, and did a lot of emergency management contract work. During that time, Hurricane Katrina happened. I spent a year down in Louisiana in some disaster recovery, and ended up saying, okay, if I want to do humanitarian relief, I really enjoy supply chain, look for a degree, a graduate degree that would give me those skills, but also give me a degree that I could always make money with, that would give me a set of skills that were marketable at any point in my career. And so I went ahead, got an MBA, and then was always interested in humanitarian relief. And so when I graduated, actually through an alumnus connection from MIT, I went and worked for the World Food Program for 2 years in logistics, and really enjoyed it. But working so I was in Sudan for a year, and then I was in Rome for a year, and spent a couple of months in Cairo after the Arab Spring, and so I really enjoyed the work, but the career path that I was on was taking me, my next steps, I'd have to go into, probably be in a remote location, very isolated, and very insecure. So, in remote parts of Darfur or places like that. And I thought, that's not really for me, not at this point in my life. And so, and I had some health issues, an undiagnosed GI issue from all of my travels, and ended up going home. And at that point, I decided I wanted to make a life here in the US. And I had already made some contacts in the area of global health supply chain. And there was a lot of interest in my skills. Having an MBA, having some logistics experience, it was, it lent itself very well to a switch to health. And so I ended up, at the time, there was a lot of money being made available by donors in the area of reproductive health. So there were a lot of jobs. As a supply chain person, I didn't have a health background, so I could have gone into any health area, but reproductive health was hiring, so that's where I went. And it's funny, it wasn't until after that someone pointed out, well, there's a lot of the sort of gender equality issues and so on that go along with family planning programs and, empowerment of women and so on. And, it's maybe a little bit after I got the job that I really started to become passionate about the field of reproductive health, about the opportunities, about the importance of, making family planning products available to women in developing countries, and the importance of not stocking out of these products as well. And so that's where I've been for the last 7 years at this point. And we'll see where life takes me next.
Great, thank you so much. So currently we're in the midst of a really unbelievable global event. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic transformed your day-to-day work, and how do you see it affecting your long-term projects?
Yeah, so, as somebody who works in collaboration, I would say when the pandemic first hit, sort of February, March, a lot of the organizations that I work with really turned inwards. It's like we're just trying to get our own supply chains together, our own, and just figure out what we're going to do with our own offices in affected countries and that sort of thing. So initially my work was very quiet. And then it's been probably in the last month or so that it's like, okay, we've sort of sorted out, all of the logistical issues of, having our staff working remotely and that sort of thing. And I've seen that things pick up. But I think the bigger impact, which is around my job, maybe not as much in my day-to-day, is the impact that we've had on our supply chains, which has been profound. And has evolved over as the pandemic has evolved across the globe. So for example, it started in China. In reproductive health, we don't procure a lot from companies in China, so it wasn't as much a concern for us, but for my HIV colleagues, my malaria colleagues, they were severely impacted right away. But later on, especially when it came to Europe, for example, we keep a lot of our family planning products. We have them shipped to a regional warehouse in Belgium before shipping to our recipient countries. And of course, as things were shutting down in Belgium, we're kind of rushing to get everything out of, onto boats and, out of the warehouse. We didn't know, if that was going to be considered essential or what might happen. So there's a big scramble around that. One of our most popular products, what we call the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is the actual sort of the hormone in the hormonal contraceptive, was produced. There's just one place in the world that it's produced. It happened to be in northern Italy. So when northern Italy started to shut down, that was a big concern for us. So then there was a lot of impact on our suppliers. We also procure from India. They shut down for 30, 45 days or more. So it was just kind of rolling across the globe to the point where we've had restrictions and just transportation assets not being available. Trucks just aren't riding. Shutdowns, customs clearance in the recipient countries was limited because of limited staff, and then of course the concern of once it arrives in country, if the country is shut down, can you get it out to the health facilities? So it's just sort of all along from the source all the way down to the health facilities. We've been dealing with a lot of disruption. And I think long term, there's, I think a lot of us are very worried about the impacts that it will have in developing countries. It's sort of hit the developing world later. So we're still trying to see what's going to happen. And particularly in family planning, I think, one of the big concerns in our community is if all of a sudden resources are being shifted towards COVID-19 care, or if they're closing health facilities, or if they're not offering family planning services, because they're reducing the services that are available in the health facilities, or if women are concerned or scared to go to a health facility to get their products, that there's really going to be a huge impact on access to family planning in the long run. And so that's been something, that advocates in our field have been worried about. about the products being available, but also just this long-term shift away from having family planning available and accessible to women, and what that could mean, for women in the long term can be, lead to increases in maternal mortality, or potential illegal abortions, or the list goes on about the kind of impacts that we could see when women don't have access to these services and to these products.
Thank you. And finally, what would your advice be to a Middlebury student or graduate who is looking to start a career in the field of international development? And do you have any specific advice relating to networking or finding a job in our current economic climate?
Yeah, so, I talked a little bit before about how international development is changing, and that the traditional sort of development landscape of DC-based programming and long expat tours overseas and so on, and how that's all changing. And so I think with that, I would encourage people who are interested in international development to think more broadly. And that could include, and I always recommend this when I do talk to alumni or those interested in the field, I always recommend, well, what about, multinational corporations, for example, who are working in these markets, are commercially developing these markets for their products. That would be a place that you could learn a lot. So say like a Johnson & Johnson, a Procter & Gamble, those sorts of, a Unilever in particular, those are ones that you could consider. You could also consider, and I know that maybe when I was a graduate, maybe I'd have a hard time with this too, but oil companies, mining companies, they're working in these, or British American Tobacco Company, like they're growing their products, cargo, agricultural companies that may not have the best reputation in our field, but if you remember, it's just your first job, first of all, and second of all, even if you were to spend the rest of your life as an activist, on behalf of indigenous people impacted by, oil companies in these places, if you have worked for them, understand how they make their decisions, why they make their decisions, what their culture is, that's going to make you a lot more effective, even in the future. So I would even encourage people to consider those types of companies that are working in the countries that you're interested in. Mm-hmm. In terms of, graduating in this economic climate, I've been unfortunate in that I've graduated into 2 recessions in my life. So I was a class of 2002 at Middlebury. 9/11 happened, the second day of classes my senior year, and then the dot-com bubble burst, and then the same when I was in getting my MBA. Lehman Brothers went under in my first month of my second year, so graduated into the Great Recession then. And all I remember, job searches are always stressful. I think it's especially stressful, graduating into recession. And I think preparing yourself to be able to effectively sort of deal with that additional stress, I think, is important. And the way you prepare yourself is to make sure that you're doing everything that you can. So, working with your career services, you have your right resume, you have the right cover letter, but you mentioned networking, and the last 2 jobs that I've gotten have entirely been through networking. I never once applied just through an online system and actually gotten a response. And so there's a very good book that actually I read recently because I felt like I needed to work a little bit more on my networking skills. And it's called the 20-Minute Networking Interview, and I would highly recommend that. And because there's something I was terrible at when I was an undergrad. So it takes practice. And so networking is very important, especially in the field of international development, but for any field really. And then I also advise people that a truly networked job search, you'll likely talk to, on average, 100 to 150 people. That's a lot of conversations. And I say that to people not to discourage them, but to kind of light the fire. Like, you got a lot to go through. And in my last 2 job searches, I probably averaged around 80 people or so. But also, you know, out of that 100 to 150, 5, maybe 10 conversations that are actually going to lead you to a job. And so, you know, or just a handful of people are going to be the ones that are going to get you there. And so, you know, I think that goes along with managing your stress of graduating in a recession, of, you know, there's going to be a lot of conversations that will not lead to anything, but you'll learn something from, hopefully, about the field, about a company, that sort of thing. So I think, so that's another way of kind of managing your expectations, because I know a lot of people say, oh, well, I network, but it doesn't get me anywhere. It's like, well, you know, 100 conversations, only a handful, you know, you just need one that's going to get you there. But unfortunately, it takes a while to get to that point. And so, you know, and so I think if you're doing all of those things right, then it's important to remember at the times of stress or frustration that, you know, well, you're doing everything right, and it will lead to a job. It just, it's a difficult economy. It's going to take longer. Job searches take a while anyways. And that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ellen, for joining the MIDDVantage series. We are very grateful to Tracy Himmel, Isham, Fariha Hack, and Jeff Sawyer for including both of us in this series of Careers International Development. Again, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we hope you'll check out future episodes in this and other career conversations.